Today, several of you have mentioned it this evening, and I want to make sure that we don't lose the momentum that Jackie worked so hard to try and build. I was so honored when she asked me to be a part of this caucus and to help lead the effort. I'll explain to you in just a minute what drew me into this and why it's a passion of mine as well. But I'm very pleased to announce that the caucus has a new co-chair. My esteemed colleague, Rep. Chrissy Houlahan, of Pennsylvania's 6th Congressional District. And you're going to hear from her in just a few minutes. I'm not going to try to steal her thunder because she's got a lot of thunder to give it. She's got an outstanding background, and you're gonna enjoy hearing from her. But let me say this: I'm very much looking forward to working with Chrissy, with Rep. Houlahan, to continue these efforts of raising awareness on the dangers of unexploded ordnance, in addition to the successful demining work that's occurring around the world. She has an exceptional resume, as I mentioned, of superior performance and service. That's her heart, is serving, and I believe we're going to see great things from her here in this caucus as well. I'm proud of our past achievements. I wish I could claim credit for them, but Jackie Spear is the one that started all of this, or at least as far as I know she is. But I can tell you that I'm proud of the past accomplishments of the caucus, including advocating for and obtaining increased funding for these important efforts. In FY23, conventional weapons destruction programs received about $9.5 million in additional funds above FY22. Someone was telling me earlier, the ambassador was telling me that there was a time when we had, what, $1 million or something like that?
$1.5 million.
Million and a half, right? It's
2003.
It's a drop in the bucket to what is really needed globally to address this issue. But in addition to that $9.5 million in additional funds for FY22, resources for demining in Ukraine, the bipartisan support of this caucus helped to make all of that happen. I have no doubt that Representative Houlahan and I will build on these successes in this new Congress, and I look forward to working with all of you to make sure that happens. I told you I'd share with you what kind of got me started in this. Is anybody here from Sri Lanka, or anybody that's been to Sri Lanka other than me? Okay. In 2014, Laura and I, was it 14? 15? 17. I've lost track of my days. I'm 68 years old, forgive me, right? So 2017, we were in Sri Lanka. And we went out to a Halo Trust operation. And I was shocked to find that the way they were having to remove the unexploded ordnance, the landmines, many of them that were buried in the ground in the conflict zone. If you're familiar with Sri Lanka's decades-long civil war that ended in 2009, the landscape in the conflict zone riddled with unexploded ordnance. And people could not inhabit the land that rightfully belonged to them. They couldn't even go back home. But what was so emotional and moving to me were the people that were doing the work. They were getting paid for it, okay, with global funds, but the people that were doing the work were the war widows. In some cases, the war children, the female war children, because the fathers and the brothers had all been either killed or disappeared through unexplained circumstances. They weren't around anymore. And if they were going to be able to re-inhabit their homes and their land, then they had to do it. And they would be down on their knees, and you can see some of the pictures of some of these things, some of these activities, and just painstaking hours and hours a day to try and recover the land that was rightfully theirs. So I'm telling you, this has a special place in my heart. I'm also the chair of the Human Rights Caucus for Human Rights in Sri Lanka for all ethnic minorities in Sri Lanka, so I'm involved from that perspective too. But this is very important to me. But you've heard from me before. I'll introduce some of our other guests in a minute, but I want you to hear from our new co-chair right now, Representative Chrissy Houlahan. So please give her a warm welcome as she comes.
It's a little intimidating. I'm really, really grateful to be here today, and thank you so much to Representative Johnson for that really kind introduction and for the support that you've provided. We got to meet one another in Rep. Johnson's office, which for those of you guys who don't hang around Washington as much as we do, that's a really special privilege to be invited into somebody's office, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to sit and meet with your team. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to serve as co-chair here in this important caucus in the 118th. I am also really, really grateful to stand on the shoulders of Representative Spear, who has been a mentor of mine in a lot of different ways. She is also the former chair of the Military Personnel Subcommittee on HASC, and was very influential to me in terms of my understanding of the role of Congress in helping military personnel. I am a veteran, and now I'm a third-term member of both the House Armed Services and the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I'm really familiar as a consequence from my background and also my experience here in Congress on the devastating impact that our wars have on our local communities. And my why, why am I here, has to do with a real interest in finding that intersection, the intersection of armed services and foreign affairs, how you can use the tools of diplomacy, and prevent the wars from happening, and once the wars unfortunately do happen, unwinding them into a just peace and making sure that we are bringing communities back to a sense of normalcy. And I do also have a particular interest in women and girls for obvious reasons, as they serve both in uniform and in families and also in their communities. And as you mentioned, Rep. Johnson, many of the women, many people who are involved in this aspect of post-war survival happen to be women and young girls. So we now are seeing the kind of images that we have seen as I was growing up, coming out of Asia and other parts of the world, now coming out of Ukraine as well. My father was born in what is now Ukraine and what was at the time Poland, and seeing the images of his childhood repeated once again are some frightening things to see. Residential buildings and schools and hospitals in Ukraine are being devastated and demolished. As we've seen, access to food and clean water is certainly uncertain, and families are being ripped apart there as they have been across the world in conflicts before. Agreements will be signed, buildings will be rebuilt, and displaced people will return slowly to their homes, as we have seen in other wars before. My father also served in Vietnam, as an example. And over time, the physical reminders of war in places will slowly fade. They'll fade out of the landscape, and they'll fade from the memories of people who have been a part of that conflict, except for where it comes to landmines and unexploded ordnances. So as we know, these weapons remain a very serious threat, sometimes for decades afterwards, to communities that have already been exposed and suffered with so much. Children step on them on their way to schools, farmers and their livestock run over them while plowing fields, and lives will be continued to be shattered long, long after official ends to hostilities. So we know some of the data. The most recent landmine monitor data indicates that at least 5,500 people were killed or injured by mines or other explosives just in 2021 alone. And the vast majority were civilians, and half of those were children. So we really must do everything that we can to prevent these casualties. And so that's why the work of this caucus is so critical, and demining organizations like Halo Trust and MAG International, and all of our partners who are here at this, from the State Department's Office of Weapons Removal and Abatement, and all of the other folks who are standing here in this room in unity on this issue. We as a global community have to do a better job of ensuring that when wars and conflicts end, that all weapons are removed and accounted for, not just the visible ones. And so this work is terribly difficult, of course, and one of the reasons why people use landmines is that they can be placed nearly anywhere. And rarely are they systemically tracked so that they can be easily removed later. and with an estimated 110 million landmines, I'll say that again, 110 million landmines in the ground right now around the world, with an estimated price tag of removal of $300 to $1,000 per mine. This work is going to take a long time, and it's not going to happen overnight, and it's certainly not going to be free. So even with the necessary funding and identifying removing the explosives, it's really tiresome work, and I am absolutely in awe of the men and women who each day are putting on body armor and performing this very dangerous work so that others can thrive and live in safety. This is where it gets fun. I'm especially impressed with the women who are challenging cultural norms and who are seizing the opportunities to make a difference in their communities. And you'll see here an image of a photo display of Lilia, and I'm going to make sure I say her name correctly, Hanatulina, who is even harder to pronounce than Houlahan, who works for the Halo Trust in Ukraine. This is a young woman from an area in Ukraine where fierce fighting has destroyed infrastructure and families already, and she's fled the fighting with Halo and is now working to remove explosive hazards as a deminer and medic working just outside of Kiev. The continued dedication of people like Lilia to demine is truly inspiring. So this difficult work must continue to happen to make sure that we and our children are able to live in a world where we can walk to school or walk to a well to get clean water and not worry about stepping in the wrong spot. And I'm encouraged that the U.S. has already helped so many countries reach mine impact-free status, and I look forward to seeing countries like Kosovo and Sri Lanka, Zimbabwe, and others soon achieve mine impact-free status as well. So I'm also very pleased to see the Conventional Weapons Destruction Account, as you mentioned, received $264 million in funding in last year's omnibus, along with support that was very much needed for demining in Ukraine as well. So as co-chair of this caucus, I'm very, very excited to expand on the work that's already been done and the shoulders that I have the opportunity to stand on. I'm really excited to expand the scope and scale of this caucus and the membership of this caucus, and we'll work very diligently with Rep. Johnson to do that. I'm really proud to be a co-chair of this vitally important caucus, and I hope that we will be able to work together. I don't want to say for years to come, because this is a business that you'd like to run yourself out of business on, and I'm grateful for your welcoming me as a co-chair and for all of those who are here this evening. Thank you for having us.
Didn't I tell you? We're in for a good long tenure, I think. And she's right. You know, we try to work ourselves out of these things. You know, if we go about this right, the day will come. Who knows? Maybe on our watch that we don't have these problems to deal with, and we can only hope. We'll now have two important members of our caucus give brief remarks. First, Congressman Bera, if you want to come up, please. Sure.
Johnson, and thank you, Congressman Houlahan, for your leadership. They deserve the thanks. And you know, Jackie Spear's already been recognized, but when I think about why I'm interested in it, I think we've got to remember the big loss of Senator Patrick Leahy. A lot of his work and seminal work in the Senate was about war legacy issues. And you know, I have the privilege of, my primary committee is the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and have had the privilege of chairing the subcommittee on Asia and the Pacific, as well as being ranking member. So, you know, we thought about our travel schedule this past year, you know, intentionally said, I'd like to go to Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia to look and understand those war legacy issues, to get out in the field, because you can read about them, you can see things, but you really have to get out there and meet the people and the people that are doing the work. So this past October, in a bipartisan way, I was able to lead a delegation of 6 of us to Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. And you don't realize the challenge that we have. And you know, when I truly have to answer the question, why this interest, we can't erase the past. We can't change what happened in the 60s and 70s. We can't go back and, you know, we dropped over 2 million tons of cluster munitions, include 270 million cluster bombs. Over a third of those bombs never went off. It'll take 30 years to clear the land in Laos, working diligently. Again, we can't erase the past, but we can do right in the present. And I think that's what Senator Leahy certainly embodied, and that's something that, working with the two co-chairs and the other members of Congress, I'd like to continue to work on, certainly in that region. I also, as both Congressman Johnson and Congresswoman Houlahan suggested, we should stop making the same mistakes that we did in the past. I mean, the fact that Ukraine is going to be another Laos in the future, and just having in mind those parts of the world. We should come together and try to find our better nature and try to prevent the mistakes of the past, but we should also do right by the people that have been impacted. I had a chance to go visit. I'm a doctor by training, so we went and visited a hospital in Laos as well, where they are providing artificial limbs to victims who of these unexploded ordnances. We've got to continue providing that support and providing that funding here in Congress. And I'm glad that we've gone from 1.5 million to a significantly higher number, but it's not high enough in my mind, because it will take a lot of long-term sustained work. So I look forward to working with the two co-chairs. I look forward to working, Senator Chris Coons is taking up some of the work in the Senate and working in a bipartisan way to do right by the world and to do right by the future. So thank you for allowing us to share a few words.
Thank you, Congressman Bera. And now we'll hear from Congressman Earl Blumenauer.
Thank you, Bill. It's a pleasure to be with you, Chrissy, Ami, my colleagues who are part of this effort. My first experience on the ground was over 20 years ago with President Clinton. We were in Vietnam, having an opportunity to deal with people who are wrestling with the consequences, the deadly consequences of unexploded ordnance, Agent Orange. It persists. It is our responsibility. 50 years ago, we embarked on, more than 50 years ago, embarked on a path that was sad. But it's not just in Southeast. We are still turning up unexploded ordnance every spring as farmers in France plow their fields. This is truly a global challenge. Part of what we need to do is focus on these areas of greatest concentration, and I appreciate the reference to what's going on now in Ukraine. But one of the things that we can do to make sure that we're making the investments that we need, not just in terms of demining, we are woefully underinvested in the technology to be able to find and detect and remove these. And it is something that matters in the United States. We have unexploded ordnance. It's in the conflict zones. I am pleased that we have a bipartisan caucus that is focused on the details, trying to help people understand the dynamic and provide support here in Congress for something that isn't on everybody's radar screen, but should be. And each dollar we invest here will pay dividends multiple times to come. Thank you very much.
Well said, Congressman Blumenauer. Thank you very much. Next, we're fortunate to have the opportunity to hear from His Excellency Sisavath Inphachanh, the current ambassador from Laos to the United States and Canada.
Honorable Congressman Bill Johnson and Congresswoman Chrissy Houlahan, Ambassador Hartwick, distinguished Congressman, representative from Vietnam Embassy, also here, and international organization and development partner to the Laos PDR, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I have great honor to attend the first time the Congressional UXO and Demining Caucus here. As you are well aware, Laos is heavily affected by the UXO, which was dropped during the Secret War in 1963 to 73. Up to now, some Lao people are still suffering from the war legacy because more than 30% of those bombs, or around 80 million bombs, still remain unexploded and are still active under the ground of rice field, farmland, forests, and with no exception in school and residential area in the remote area of Laos. The UXO have already claimed the life of more than 50,000 people, both adult children, since the war ended, and they continuously kill and injure out every year. UXO clearance activity is a priority goal of the Laos government, which is also put in implementation of the National 18 SDG in order to improve the livelihood of the people by expanding the land area for agriculture and removing the UXO obstacle for the development. In this regard, many of our donor countries and development partners, including the US Congress and US government, have kindly provided assistance and resources to Laos in order to solve the existing problem. However, we do not yet know when and how long it would take to completely remove UXO in Laos, so as to bring about the well-being and normal livelihood to the people. Ladies and gentlemen, currently there is still a huge challenge regarding UXO clearance in Laos, as the available budget is limited and does not meet demand to completely remove the current number of UXO in contaminated areas across the countries, which would take decades to remove all. Moreover, UXO clearance is not simple task, as it requires a commitment and a huge budget from all stakeholders. Some experts say that it takes 1,000 years to remove all. The Lao government highly appreciates the contribution of the US Congress and US government to assist in the UXO clearance activity, including assistance through the NGOs such as Legacy of War, Hello, MAC, and so on over the past year. The Lao government would like UXO assistance to focus on actual areas such as survey and clearance, capacity building for UXO clearance officers, UXO risk education, and assistance to UXO victims. In this occasion, we sincerely hope that the US Congress would continue to extend its further support and assistance to the Lao PDR for the UXO clearance, which is a major obstacle for national development. Once again, on behalf of the Lao government, I would like to express my sincere thanks to the US Congress for continued support and assistance extended to Lao PDR, which have importantly contributed to our national development, and especially in the UXO clearance. The Lao PDR stands ready to cooperate with the US stakeholders in broadening and deepening Lao-US bilateral cooperation. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. And now we'll hear a different perspective from another Ambassador Douglas Hartwick, who has been on the ground. He served as ambassador to Laos from 2001 to 2004. Ambassador.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. When I was invited to attend this, I was so impressed to hear how large this caucus had grown steadily over the past couple of decades. And in a bipartisan manner, it really warmed my heart to think, when I think as Representative Johnson referred to the amount of money that we, the United States, was putting toward removal of UXO in 2002, 2003 was $1.5 million. And it, as an American, and knowing the difficulties of the Vietnam War and the secret war in Laos, which many people, even to this day, don't know much about, to realize how much damage had been done and was still underway, it was almost an embarrassment. So it's such a heartening thing to realize we come back 2 decades later, and now we're looking at $30 to $40 million a year, which is, it is the range to at least make a serious dent in a problem that could go on for much, 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 much too long. I saw Mozambique and one other country here are declared mine-free. I would hope that the countries in Southeast Asia, and in my case Laos, really have a chance sometime in the next few decades to kind of get to that point. Very different environment. I've been on the board of Legacies of War for the last 3 years, and I've been associated with Legacies of War for the last 10, in part because of what I experienced when I was ambassador in Laos. All of you have heard of the Vietnam War. Most of you probably heard of the Secret War, which is basically an adjunct of the Vietnam War. But the reality on the ground there was really an enormous amount of ordnance and bombing. Not just bombing from the air by the United States, but a lot of other ordnance and so forth, all over the country. And the Lao people have just sort of soldiered on. And when I first got there, they were probably losing 100 people, dead people, a year. I don't even know how many people might have been injured and maimed. Now those numbers have come down substantially. The awareness has helped. Removal has helped. And so now we're looking at numbers that are far more reasonable considering what it had been in the past. One of my trusted Lao employees at the embassy, he and I were talking about, I'd just come back from a trip somewhere up north, and his name was Suvano. And Suvano said, oh, I know about UXO. I said, how do you know about it? He probably was, 30 years old then, right? Oh, 30 years old when I saw him, so he would have been a child. He said, oh yeah, my friends and I, we were in the village in wherever it was, Sullivan, and we came across this, what he referred to, which you all, many of you, almost all of you probably know, Bumby, a little yellow, heavy thing, a little bit bigger than a baseball. And he said, oh, we came across one of these Bumbys. He said, and we knew, oh, we gotta be careful. So we picked it up and we threw it against a tree. It didn't go off. But I'm hearing this story from one of my employees and I'm thinking, oh my God. I mean, you could see how the lack of awareness, the lack of understanding of how dangerous things was still very much a part of the life today. As ambassador in Laos, the Vietnam War was in the backdrop of everything I did. We had trying to remove remains of MIA, people shot down over Vietnam during the war. We worked hard to try to encourage former soldiers that had been part of the Royal Lao military or supported by the CIA who had run back up into the mountains when the war was finished, and to encourage them to come down. It was a problem in many of the provincial provinces because they'd been up there for 35 years. And getting them out, getting them to trust to come down, getting them to trust the Lao government was tough. But it was continued to be a problem, so we worked on that. Trade relations had been broken, and I worked hard to try to get us reestablished for normal trade relations between the United States and Laos, recognizing that, you know, if you're going to help a country, getting good, solid trade relations on a better footing was going to be very, very important. So all of those things took up all of my time, and it was critically important. But the worst thing was Unexploded Ordnance, because everywhere I went, when I went up country, and I visited all 17 provinces. Not in all 17 provinces did you have UXO, but you had them in all the ones sort of in the center and then in the direction of Vietnam. And the problems were horrific. Right? And so seeing this group tonight, knowing that members of Congress are focused on it, knowing the United States has stepped up in a very significant way. Senator Leahy was a critical, important factor in all of this. The Lao government has been increasingly supportive. The fact that Ambassador Sisavath is here is to me, very, very meaningful. In 2001, 2003, the Lao government was very cautious about getting involved with anyone in Congress, you could imagine, right? UN they could do, but here, so seeing this happen now, it's really a whole nother time. So thank you all for coming. It's a good investment to help the country and the people of Laos, and it's a good investment for the United States to help build a relationship, rebuild a relationship that so many suffered from way back when. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Ambassador. Finally, we will hear from Steve Costner, Deputy Director of the Office of Weapons Removal and Abatement, Political Military Affairs Bureau at the U.S. Department of State. Director Costner.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to start off with something very important, in case you're wondering, and that is if you want to sneak in the back and get a drink, I won't be offended. Okay? First, I would like to thank both Representative Johnson and Representative Houlahan for co-chairing this very important caucus that is doing very important work. And Congressman, you mentioned that you're also on the Human Rights Committee, and I would say that these two issues are closely intertwined. I'd also like to recognize Ambassador Sisavath as well as Ambassador Hartwick. There's been a lot of talk tonight about the Lao PDR. It is one of our largest programs, both year by year and historically. In fiscal year 2022 alone, the allocation for programs from our office in Lao PDR was $40 million. Our total funding for FY22 was, I believe it was $253 million. That's not including the $83 million supplemental for Ukraine, which is being expended now. $264 million was also mentioned as the allocation from Congress for fiscal year 2023. The program initially started in 1993. Since then, the assistance has totaled over $4.6 billion with a B dollars in approximately 120 countries. So what is that money used for? It's now, it used to be called our Humanitarian Mine Action Program. It's now CWD, Conventional Weapons Destruction. The majority of that money does go to humanitarian mine action, meaning getting the mines out of the ground, but also, of course, getting the UXO out of the ground. Ambassador Houlahan mentioned 110 million estimated mines in the ground currently. Well, that doesn't even include the UXO, and I don't know if anyone has any idea of how much UXO is in the ground. So quite a daunting challenge before all of us. Besides getting the mines actually out of the ground, Ambassador, you mentioned in Laos throwing the bombay against the tree to make the danger go away. Mine risk education, or now explosive ordnance risk education, is also very important. Part of the funding goes for that. Part of the funding goes also for victim assistance, or what's called also survivor assistance. All very important aspects in addressing the tragedy caused by mines and UXO. What some of you may not be as aware of is part of the money this is why the overall funding line was changed to conventional weapons destruction, also addresses excuse me, excess small arms and light weapons and associated ammunition. Countries may have excess weapons or ammunition or obsolete that they really don't need anymore, but you don't want to fall in the wrong hands, or generally at risk of proliferating, or in the case of old and obsolete ammunition that may not be getting handled correctly, of detonation. And there's been many tragedies of armories detonating, and then you have something that looks like more like a mine UXO tragedy that has to be cleaned up. And it's much cheaper and easier, more efficient and less tragic to address that before the armory does blow up, instead of after it blows up. If anyone is interested in learning more about the program, we put out To Walk the Earth in Safety. It's our annual comprehensive report on programs worldwide. There's some around the room. This is the one actually covering 2021. So we put the new one out in early April, on or close to Mine Awareness Day on April 4th. So the new one is coming, but if anyone's interested, this is around if you want to see, get a taste of what's out there. We also have sidebars in it, one for each region with a different theme. In this one, it was food security. And then the next one, we'll have another thing, which I'll get to in a minute. But that's kind of a broad overview of what we cover. Now, it's my understanding that going forward this year, the UXO Caucus has a couple themes that fit in very nicely with what we do and what our priorities are. One of them, you can correct me if I have this wrong, if I have it wrong, but it's women, peace, and security. And this is a priority for the administration writ large, but it's also a priority for our programs. And every year there's an ever-increasing participation by women across all aspects of humanitarian mine action. Victim and survivor assistance, mine risk education in the form of community liaison teams, but also actually out there doing the work on the ground, the very dangerous work, getting the mines out of the ground, getting the UXO out of the UXO removed as well. There are all female demining teams with female leaders. There are many mixed teams that are led by women. And as I said, every year those numbers are going up. Another theme for us, and what I was told that the caucus will be addressing, is both conservation and climate resiliency. We all know what issues are related to climate change right now, and addressing those issues is often, successfully addressing them is often exacerbated by mines and UXO on the ground, as well as the ability to get to, say, a scarce water resource because it's blocked by mines or UXO. And one of the reasons I'm highlighting that is in the new copy of the Walk the Earth in Safety that's coming out in April. That's the thing for the sidebars there. We have a number of human interest stories addressing that. One example is in Angola, Okavango River Basin is contaminated with mines and UXO, and that is being cleared. That's an area that the country wants to make into a national park, but it's also a vital migration path for many of the large African animals that my understanding is not as many are getting injured in that area anymore because they've learned the tragic way that area needs to be avoided. Another example of addressing climate change and climate resiliency, again, is water. In Iraq, removing mines and UXO so there is access to very scarce water supplies. But that's a theme in many of our countries that we deal with around the world. And one thing to keep in mind is that this humanitarian assistance, which also has a real national security impact, both for us and for specific countries and those regions, is that it is given with no strings attached. And frankly, some of the other alleged great powers out there, you can't say that about. I'll give an example of in Kazakhstan, there was a depot explosion in 2019, and after being refused assistance by Russia and then China, they came to us, and we have a quick reaction force that when there are depot explosions and things like that, we can get on scene within 48 hours to help do kind of the initial triage, assessment, make the area safe, do an assessment of what needs to be done next. And that, in the case of Kazakhstan, has turned into a long-term relationship with a longer-term project to address that tragedy and some of their other needs in the area. I can't close without, of course, mentioning Ukraine. That is certainly one of our priorities. With the supplemental that was received from Congress, supplemental assistance for FY22, we're in the process of allocating over $91.5 million to address the tragedy that we're all seeing in the news every day in Ukraine. And don't know any specifics now, but we do expect that we'll be receiving an additional supplemental in this fiscal year to help address that. In concluding, I absolutely cannot conclude without thanking all of those that are responsible for this life-saving work, and I will start with Congress. We have had strong bipartisan support for many years, and the numbers, it's not a exact straight line, but strong bipartisan support where that number is generally on an upward trend year in and year out. And we're very grateful for the support from Congress and the American taxpayer for helping us do our part in this important work. We are the kind of the pass-through in one aspect of getting the money in the right hands, and many of the people that are doing this truly dangerous work are represented in this room by many of the implementing partners that have thousands of representatives out in the field every day. So I want to thank you all for your part as well. And again, thanks for this caucus, and thanks for continuing to beat the drum and keep a spotlight on it. Thank you. I want to say one more. I meant to mention this about Ukraine. Journal of Conventional Weapons Destruction, which we put out in conjunction with JMU, has a fantastic photo essay on Ukraine. It's also in the room. And I would encourage every single one of you to take a copy, because I really don't want to haul the boxes back down the hill. So, thank you.
Hey, before we wrap up, are there any other caucus members in the room who'd like to say a few words? I know we thought we might have some come in late. Well, look, thank you all again for joining us this evening. This will be the first of several of these this session of Congress. I'd be remiss if I didn't give a special thanks to Kristen Stevens with Halo Trust. Kristen. Thank you, Kristen. And David Bloom from MAG for their help in organizing today's event. Additionally, we have 51 bipartisan members of the caucus. Now that's a pretty good sized caucus. If you have not already joined, or you know of a member that you would like to encourage to join, please reach out to my legislative director, Laura Wilson. Stick your hand up, Laura. And she'll help you out. Continue to enjoy the reception. We hope to see you again soon at another one of our caucus meetings and briefings. Have a great evening, and thank you all for coming. Thank you.